All right, welcome to RSP Film Theory. Adam Harstad, Matt Waldman. We're joining you again today. We're going to talk a little bit more about the Hall of Fame. I think we're going to look at the offensive line as well as some tight ends. And also, we'll kick this conversation off with a couple other items. What would we do if we owned an NFL franchise? Just some things that, it doesn't have to be a comprehensive plan that we're going to talk about here, but just something that we feel strongly about that we'd want to do, whether it have to do about team building, whether it had to do about how we could try to influence ownership in terms of decisions that they make from a business perspective. Whatever it is, I would be, I'm interested in finding that out, what Adam thinks, share some of my thoughts on it. And then also about players that we just know who they are already. And, last week, Adam talked about Brock Bowers, was a guy that he just felt like he knew was a cornerstone player and would be one. Was a nice timely mention as we saw on, this weekend in terms of what Bowers did. He definitely put on a show. Let's kick off with that. Is there any other players for you, Adam, that you would say, yeah, I feel like this is a cornerstone option?
Yeah, it's important. To me, it's not just like the question is not just guys you feel are a cornerstone option. It's guys who you feel like the opinion isn't going to change, because the observation is that
Okay.
for somebody like Patrick Mahomes, we all know who he is. Everybody agrees about who he is. So when he performs to that expectation, his dynasty value isn't going to rise or fall. It's going to stay flat, and all that production becomes free. Whereas I know you've been talking a lot about Ashton Jeanty, where you feel quite confident that he's a good player and you know who he is. But the consensus is that, oh, well, he's struggling with the Raiders. Maybe he's not. So that might be an example of a player who maybe you think is a cornerstone asset, but other managers don't. And so their opinion is going to rise. And yeah, for me, I don't do that much scouting. I kind of ask this of you because I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on guys who have shown at this point that they are who they are. I can name all the basic ones. It's a lot easier to find guys at quarterback because the careers are so long and because they tend to be so stable. I mentioned Mahomes. I mentioned Dak Prescott. Obviously, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen. We know who they are. They're going to be contending for MVPs anytime they're healthy. At like the non quarterback positions, I mentioned Bowers. To me, I've seen enough. I think Bowers is I'm very confident that Bowers is who he is. He's going to be continuing to give you that strong positional advantage for 5 years. His dynasty value is not really going to move that much in that time. Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, I would say Bijan Robinson, Jonathan Taylor. Although Taylor's starting to get a little bit old, and then once you pass a certain age, like once you're a 27-year-old running back, you're going to start getting downgraded just because people are very age phobic in Dynasty, because they're chasing longevity and they think age is the best measure of longevity. Although, tell that to Derrick Henry. Good players just last longer. So like I said, I can name a lot of quarterbacks because quarterbacks to me are the easiest position to scout statistically. I think there's the biggest match between statistics and underlying play at quarterback. So as somebody who's mostly looking at the numbers, that's the easiest position for me. And then Bowers was kind of my big call where like, it's not, I'm kind of going out on a limb saying we know who he is already. But I was happy that he really backed me up on that last week, I feel. And if you didn't know who he was, I feel like now you know.
Yeah, I felt on. It's funny because I never thought about you going out on a limb on that one, but that was interesting that somebody commented in our podcast about, well, he hasn't performed well earlier in the year, and I'm like, well, did you see the brace the size of the Bay Bridge on his knee, like to begin the season? I think there's a little bit of a reason for that. He's healthy now.
Yeah, I think people are a little gun shy because of like Sam Laporta, who has not been playing bad, but like his production has not really matched his
Yeah.
rookie year. And so I think people are like, well, we thought we knew who Laporta was. He was the number one dynasty tight end, and he just hasn't been back there. And now he's like the number 4, number 5 dynasty tight end. Maybe Bowers could do something like that. But to me, Laporta and Bowers were just different as rookies. Laporta had like a surprising and good rookie year, but like Bowers just looked more like a superstar to me than Laporta ever did.
Oh yeah, Laporta's a good player. He's more of a Mark Andrews type of player in terms of he does certain things really well, and you put him in the right system and you make him a priority, and he can be a high volume catch target. But there's a difference between those guys and George Kittle and Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers is a wide receiver who happens to play tight end, and he's a primary wide receiver who can do a lot of the tight end things in the same way that Kittle can be. So those are good examples. I'd also
say, hang on, while we're on tight ends, I would also say I think Tyler Warren, I'm not there yet saying he's the guy, but I think he's more on the Brock Bowers end, and then Trey McBride, I think, is more on the Sam Laporta end, for whatever that's worth.
I'm going to disagree. Because I was just going to bring up Tyler Warren and say, I think we already know who he is, and most people don't. He is actually more in the Tucker Kraft role, which to me is a good tight end, but not a great tight end. And people are going to get confused with the production because they scheme these guys open so much. Even J.J. Watt, first question he had for Tucker Kraft in pre-broadcast, and he related, he goes, I asked him, so what does it feel like to catch a ball and there's like no defender within 20 yards of you on a regular basis? And the response that Ty Warren gave was a little defensive. The way that he did, I don't think he intentionally meant to relay the response that Tyler Warren gave as defensive, but it kind of was like, well, they schemed me so well with this, but it was the way that he shared it. It was like he was conveying the vocal tone of the response that sounded kind of defensive. Like, I'm better than just a guy who's getting fed gimme wide open passes. And I think both he and Tucker Kraft are, but what I haven't seen from Tyler Warren is, he doesn't run timing routes. He doesn't run the man-to-man wide receiver type of routes that shake defenders open. And as a runner after the catch, he's more of a brute who runs downhill, who's got a little bit of wiggle. So he can give you a little bit of that Gronkowski-like thing, but it's more in the Pat Freiermuth, little Gronkowski kind of thing than it is like George Kittle in that elite quickness, elite agility. And then, so to me, he and Tucker Kraft are guys that they scheme open. They get them the ball where there's nobody within 10 yards of them. They build up speed and they do their damage, and they're good at that. And if you put them up the seam and let them go up and try and get a ball up the seam, that works too. But they're not. You can take Brock Bowers and you can put him at any of the three positions at wide receiver and at tight end or out of the backfield, and he can do things that each of those positions at a reasonably high level can do. And I don't think Warren is that player. I think Warren is more of like, it's like he's in the next zip code over, but he's getting pulled back into the area that he's trying to aspire to by Mike Gesicki. Like, it's like he's almost like, I would say he's good but not great. And I think people are going to confuse him and put him more in the Laporta, like say that he's not Laporta, he's better. I think he's more of a Laporta type of guy, but in a different way.
And would you put McBride? You mentioned Tucker Kraft. He's another good one. You put McBride kind of in that axis as well?
Yeah, probably a little higher. I think he's actually a little better than Kraft, and then he might have his own tier between Kittle and Bowers, and then all those guys after him, because he's been held back by a guy who I feel like I've known who this guy is for a long time, and the Cardinals have figured it out, and that's Kyler Murray. So I think that I think when he gets a quarterback who is more of if he can get a quarterback that's a little bit more higher end version of Jacoby Brissett, who's played well, but can really spread it around and do certain things, some of the things that Kyler does with him, as a first read, but also can get to him as a second and third read. I think McBride could sustain some of his production. You mentioned Jeanty. Just as a side note, I wrote about him yesterday, and one of the fascinating things I saw, and, again, it's about how you set the parameters. So my parameters might be a little too lofty for this, but I wanted to see since, say, about players who started their careers around 2005, 2006, wide receivers and running backs. I just wanted to see how many of them I decided to set 7 years. How many of them had careers of at least 7 years? So they essentially played to 29 or 30. How many of them out of those 7 years had at least 5 years as a fantasy starter? And I set that parameter as running back 1 or running back 2 or wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, like top 24 production. And I said it and said, how many of them had at least 5 seasons out of that at least 7-year career of doing that? So I counted the running backs going back to guys like LaDainian Tomlinson, who played, I wanted guys who played at least between 2006 and 2016 as this starting point. So I kind of went that far back. And there were 23 backs, and I don't think I've got all the way through everybody, but I did a pretty good job of looking through. I just went through Football Guys, rankings, and just kind of did every year and looked for guys. And there were 23 backs. And then I looked at what round they were drafted in the NFL draft and how many times they had, at least how many times they had that kind of production. And the cutoff being, of course, at least 5 years. So there were 23 of them. I think 16 of those 23 were drafted in the first or second round. And there were only 2 drafted after the third round. So it was interesting to see that, even and half of these backs were from our current era who are still active. So I was looking at that and thought, all right. So if you really think that this is a good back and you think that he's, an elite back, part of maybe being an elite back, or maybe not elite is the right word, but having a very good to great career, which means many years of good production, part of that is availability, and maybe being proven that you can handle a workload and be, is worth, an earlier round pick. But he was, first, second round. So then I looked at receivers, and I expected I would have 40 receivers or something like that. No, 23.
It's probably the same number. 23? Yeah.
It was the exact same number.
Yeah.
23. And there were more of them drafted after the third round than there were running backs. There were fewer of them drafted in the first and second round. Not a lot fewer, but there were 3 times as many. I think 6 were drafted after the third round, as opposed to only 2 at running back. And I even had to spot one player. It was really actually weighted a little more towards running back than wide receiver. And that was interesting to me, just because from a standpoint of, I picked the numbers I did, the parameters I did, because I thought when we pick these guys, we're expecting that we're going to have a long-term starter. So I thought, what is that? It's not 2 years. It's not 3 years. It's got to be if a dynasty window to me is a 3-year window, a 2 or 3 year window, then I'm expecting they at least have 2 career windows worth of value, to be the kind of player that you would have as a cornerstone, And so it was fascinating to me to see that it was equal, if not slightly weighted, to running backs, and the running backs who were drafted in the first round by the NFL. More of them were drafted in the first round than the wide receivers. You could find, but according to draft media is it's, you can't have a running back. You can't have but you don't want to draft a running back in early rounds. Running backs don't matter. So you can find one later. Yeah, you can,
But how many years is that guy going to actually give you that production? And from the looks of it, not enough to qualify them as finding a cornerstone. Whereas at wide receiver, it's perfectly okay to take a wide receiver in the first round, according to draft media. But really, I mean, like you might be better off with the running back, especially when you look at the expected point values, at least from a fantasy perspective. They're, if you're looking at like wide receiver one, running back one production, especially the top five, they both range between about 320 to about 400 at the highest. So it's not, you could probably fine grade it and say, okay, probably wide receivers more often are at a certain level than the running backs, but you're still getting quality points. And I look at that and I found that to be interesting. Then I was looking at that because of the argument of Ashton Jeanty, and I'm looking at that, and because Raiders fans right now are like, we shouldn't have drafted a running back. Now their argument's a good one, which was we'd rather have had an offensive line than put in there. And I'm like, I understand, because in the first round there aren't as many. For running back, you can have someone the size of a gnat versus someone the size of a dump truck, and they both can get the job done at running back. There's weight and size and athletic minimums that are far more restrictive for offensive line. And so if you felt like you need to go get a lineman, I understand that argument. But at the same time, we talk about LaDainian Tomlinson a lot on this show, and you look at what Tomlinson was about, and when he showed up as a rookie, they didn't have that offensive line in place. They saw a special player. They didn't have their quarterback in place. They actually, as I joked, that if the Raiders think that Pete Carroll went to the market with a cow and traded it in for magic beans, with Ashton Jeanty, well, Marty Schottenheimer and company, went to the market, and they basically traded away the rights to Michael Vick to get LaDainian Tomlinson and some magic beans by the name of Breeze. But they didn't have an offensive line. And Tomlinson, I mean, again, as a function of the offensive line, if we're going to look at yards per carry as a function of the line, he had 3 games over 3.6 yards per carry. I think it was 3 or 4 games that whole year. He fumbled the ball 8 times, which amounted to about every other game in terms of if you were going to average out per carry, though it wasn't that, uniform. But he had over 400 touches during that first year, and he had long runs, again, more of a function of the offensive line. He had 2 runs over 30 yards. And so when people argue about Jeanty, they say things like, that's what I think they say, but no, they say things like, well, he hasn't broken a lot of long runs, and he hasn't done it really things on his own that you think a special back would do, and I just don't see the level of creativity and the ability to make big plays on his own. And people don't realize what they're saying and what they're not seeing, because if LaDainian Tomlinson, probably one of the absolute greatest running backs of all time, a first ballot Hall of Fame caliber talent, had the type of season he did without an offensive line, you need to understand that there are only you could bring up other backs like Barry Sanders or Jim Brown, but those are once every 40-year type of players, or once every 20, 30-year type of players at best. And there's only one at a time that usually act that way, who can do some of that work. And even then, it's a small sample size of their work where you see that type of highlight, and you don't act like it happened every game, with them. So Jeanty to me is absolutely one of those players. I think Caleb Williams is absolutely a cornerstone player. I'm not remotely concerned about it. The Bears fans have to be the nuttiest fans I have seen about this stuff. And living in, watching Cleveland Browns stuff for as many years as I have, to say that is something. Every little mistake, every little thing is like the end of the world. Everything is blamed on him when it really doesn't need to be. it's almost as it was. I would say it's almost worse than what we saw with Lamar Jackson. But I would say Caleb is doing just fine. He went from the most unstructured offense of like an air raid. Everything's simple. It's like a very distilled version. It's like a middle school version of the West Coast offense, and the West Coast offense being like the PhD version where you actually have to have some work experience for some military, secret military organization in government, and then come back out into the public world before you could even qualify to operate it, compared to what the air raid is like. And for him to go from something that unstructured to the most structured offense that's being run in the league right now from Ben Johnson, and to play as well as he has. People want to compare him to Goff, but Goff was an air raid quarterback who had to go back and become and learn West Coast offensive principles for 5-6 years before he even went to Ben Johnson. He already had all of that, tutelage with Sean McVay, whereas Caleb's going from one extreme to the opposite extreme. And I think he's playing very well, managing the game well for the most part. The mistakes he made are like the mistakes you want to see a quarterback make, because they're not so much dumb mistakes as they are acclamation type of mistakes. Like the interception he threw against the Ravens was essentially he should have checked it down. But you could see that his drop hit. He read the leverage well, and realized he shouldn't throw it. But instead of checking, he waited because he thought he could maybe wait out the defender's position and it would come open. And the defender just slid from over the top to trail and cut it off. He just underestimated the situation, and he should have checked it earlier. He should have checked it to the back. And it's one of those things where if you're getting used to drop footwork and timing and going from read to read out of a structured system, and you're not used to doing that, of course you're going to have some mistakes like that. But you're not seeing him like lose his shit after he makes a mistake like that and then start making horrible throws or horrible decisions like a Desmond Ridder or a Marcus Mariota at times, or a Derek Carr at times. Instead, what you end up seeing is a player who actually continues to make good plays, and then continues on to a point where when they have to make him be Superman, he's capable of the Superman plays. And part of the Superman thing is, Brandon, Angela and I were talking about that last night. Brandon was like, you've got to get used to doing the mundane stuff if you've been expected to be Superman all the time. But the offset of that, to my point, was that the fact that you can be Clark Kent for 3 quarters allows you enough time and room to scope things out without having a target on your back all the time to have to make incredible plays and overexert yourself. So when the time comes that you actually have to pick your spots to do something incredible, you aren't having the hell beaten out of you. For 3 quarters like year one. So he's one who's really underrated, and I would stay with him as a cornerstone player on there. There are plenty of other guys that I think that we would see. Let's think of a...
I gotta say, quick to interrupt.
Yeah.
When you were, I was horrified when you were telling me about your data collection project. Next time you want to do a data collection project like that, let me know, man. I will set up some data queries for you, and I can get you that data for like the running backs and the wide receivers. I can get you like all of that in like 30 seconds.
Sure. I should probably just run it. What's funny is I was being lazy, and it took me more time being lazy.
Yeah, that's how it is. See, I always say that I'm lazy and that's my superpower, but that's because I'm extraordinarily good at it.
Yeah.
I have a lot of experience, and I am professionally lazy.
Yeah.
You get these dabblers, these dilettantes who like they were not raised in the laziness and they don't know how to
Yeah, but part of it too is I used to have my own. What's funny is before this, I had an Access database that had all of Pro Football References data in it. that was a long time ago, before they were bought out. Let's just put it that way. And I used to keep up with that annually, and then I could just query everything easily that I wanted. And I did that very early on. And then there's been like a 5-year period where I wasn't using Access anymore, and I've just gotten it back, but I haven't remembered. Oh yeah, I've got that. I can go back and update some things and go from there.
Just StatHead, man. StatHead's easy.
Yeah,
Point and click.
Yeah, that's what I'll do. But yeah. Anyway, but yeah, that's some guys. I'd say that we know who. I think we know who Jackson Dart is. I think we know who Daniel Jones is. But I think most people don't. Most people are confused by all that. I think the Steelers showed us who Daniel Jones is, and that's this. If you can stop the run and not give him easy play action, 1st and 10 play action opportunities to stay ahead of the chains, and just let him be a thrower, he's a very good thrower. He's always been a very good thrower. But when you make the decision-making matrix cloudy, and you make it a little more complex and you put pressure on him, he's not the player that people think he is right now. And the Steelers showed that. And I think if Atlanta and Kansas City are capable of being able to play gap sound football and to take away Tyler Warren early, which it was not hard. Like the thing that's been, I don't hate Tyler Warren as I think people think I do. I just don't think that we should be giving him the flowers that he's getting because of fantasy points. I think they've schemed. I think his offensive coordinator should be getting those flowers. And I think the thing is that last week the Steelers did the simplest thing on the field that I've been begging teams to do every week that I've been watching this. And it's not because I'm rooting against Warren as much as that I just want to see defenses make him do something else. You know, I want to see what else he can do. And when the Steelers just said, you know what, we're going to hit Tyler Warren every chance we can get. We're going to get downhill and make sure that he's the priority receiver on this route combination and make sure that when he catches the ball, there's somebody in his face within a yard or two of him. And they did that, and he was as quiet as a church mouse on Sunday. You know, and then when they took away the league-leading production on 1st and 10 with play action that the Colts are, and the Steelers did this against Cleveland. I mean, that's why they went, you know, they eliminated Quinshon Judkins early, and then by the time Dylan Gabriel executed a 3, 5, or 7-step drop, Nick Herbig, Alex Highsmith, and Watt were basically on him by the time he was at the top of his drop. He didn't even have time to throw. And Daniel Jones had some of the same issues. I mean, he had 4 tip passes. He had 2 forced fumbles, and one of them I know for sure was at the top of his drop. And he was sacked multiple times. And he threw 3 interceptions in the game on top of that, and they were plays that he got confused, and they made it the picture cloudy and put pressure on him, and he was behind on the down and distance game script, because they could make it 2nd and 8 rather than 2nd and 3. And that's a big difference in terms of what you can call and what you can't and what the quarterback's asked to do. So I don't think he's like Sam Darnold type of reincarnated type of player. I think he's the same dude who was just in a better offensive fit. I think I'm trying to think. There's so many players that I could probably list this way, and I don't know where to even start. Name a team, and I'll give you a list of a couple more players, and then we'll move on.
I got to say the Broncos, because I know my mom is a huge Bronco fan. She wants to know, is Bo Nix, or is he throw picks?
I think Bo Nix. I think he's Bo Nix. I really do. I know that the data on him doesn't seem as strong. I know some people who watch some film who go, I don't think people understand. He's not all that good. I know some scouts who watched him at Auburn and just feel like all he is bubble screen Bo, and all that kind of stuff. But from what I've seen, his ability to work downfield, his ability to manage a game, Bo Nix to me is kind of like a more athletic Kirk Cousins, which I guess you could say that's part of it, is that Kirk Cousins had a period of years where he was a throw picks type of guy, but then continued to emerge, and he had a period of time where he was good. And I think Bo Nix is a guy who is going to wind up being like more of a Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins type of player who, with the good surrounding talent, he's a good fantasy quarterback, but he can't lift the team up on his own and bad down and distance situations all the time the way that Hurts or Mahomes or Allen can do. He's a tier below that.
I always feel like, and this is like completely unscientific and it's
Right.
just all vibes and hand waves, but I always feel like some quarterbacks like take ownership of an offense more, and some quarterbacks take ownership of an offense less. And we could say like Jared Goff, like very good quarterback, but like I never feel like he has ownership of that offense. Like Jared Goff is playing extraordinarily well, but like that's Ben Johnson's offense, that's Sean McVay's offense. Whereas I feel like Bo Nix, for better or for worse, again, he's more like a Jay Cutler type, where like that's his offense. Like he's like, how Bo goes, that's how the offense is going to go.
Yeah.
And I always like that in a quarterback. I think that's more of I think it's like more fun offense to like watch and follow. I'm biased towards, like, there's the old Johnny Unitas quote that you haven't arrived as a quarterback in the NFL until you can tell your coach to go to hell.
Yeah.
Or like Warren Van Brocklin, he was with the Rams and he played extraordinarily well, leading the league in a bunch of categories. And he asked for a trade, and they said, well, why did you want to trade? Why did you want to leave? And he's like, well, I wanted to run the offense and the coach wouldn't let me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, makes sense. And I think that you could see early on with Bo, for sure, with the sideline running with Sean Payton, that he was going to stand up to him, and Payton loved that, and and that's
because Breeze too, I think, was very much he like, a lot of people think of him as like a system quarterback, but I'm like, no man, he has like an incredible ownership of that system. Like I feel like the Saints were the Drew Brees offense more than the Patriots were the Tom Brady offense. And again, it's not a statement on like how good the players are relative to each other, because obviously Tom Brady was an extraordinary quarterback. Like we're not going to see his like again, but just in terms of like how much of the offense is like them and how much of the offense is like,
are you
like
administering a system, or are you the system?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, I get it, and I can understand the appeal of that for sure. So Denver, I would say that's certainly a one. Let's see.
Cortland Sutton's a guy, I feel like, who we know who he is.
We know who Cortland Sutton is.
Right.
And then I would say, while it's not a Denver Bronco, I'd say Jerry Jeudy, we know who he is too.
Or if we're doing former Broncos, how about Javonte Williams in Dallas?
Oh, that's a good one.
Are we learning who he is this year, or is he who we all thought he always was?
I think he is who we thought he always was, only from the sense of he's a good running back who needs the talent around him to make it happen and the right system fit. Because he didn't fit in Sean Payton's system. And he was a little slow to read some of the blocks that they asked him to, the types of scheme that he run. He runs the scheme in Dallas pretty well. And he's a bit of a bruiser in the way that he does things, which can also get him a little bit, is he someone that can stay healthy? I think he's one of those guys that, like, we'll look at him and go, he was a good back when he was available to play, and I think that's kind of the way he is. Like, low end running back one. That's kind of how I see him. I know he's been higher than that in rankings this year, but I think that's kind of what he is.
I feel like he always got kind of a bad rap, because like the analytics movement is looking at running backs. And it's like, well, basically the only thing we can really quantify with any degree of confidence is tackle breaking. Like we can't really quantify the ability to read leverage. We can't really quantify the ability to, like, this shifty movement in the hole. We can't quantify that, right? But we can quantify like when a defender gets his arms on you and you break through. And that's like Javonte Williams' best skill is going through contact. And so they're like, wow, Javonte Williams, like he's exceptional at the only thing that we can measure. So therefore he must be an extraordinary running back. Like for a time, Javonte Williams, DeAndre Swift, these were like top 3 dynasty running backs. But it was kind of just like, it's not his fault that was all that the spotting analytics set could measure. But I feel like he kind of got steamed up. They kind of got ahead of his skis on that.
Yeah, and then there's the whole, well, what kind of tackle was it? What kind? Because when we look at highlights, like I remember sitting with a former Penn State linebacker who teaches tackling around like college and high school sports and rugby tackling, and he's really into rugby and football. And he has all these KPIs on tackling. It's like a 29 KPI point list on what good tackling is. And we watched some film of like a play with Sony Michel, like it was a highlight play. Everybody was going nuts over her, where he ran over a safety. And he was just pointing out to me, he goes, I mean, what do you see? And I go, I see a safety on his knees, before the hit even happens. He goes, so what's so impressive about that? He said, there's not even a grown man standing up with leverage to even hit him. There's no momentum moving forward. He's just reaching and grabbing. He goes, anybody over I didn't say it this way, but I took it this way. It's like anybody over to the age of 15 and of 18 and in relatively good shape and about as big as that guy is should have been able to run him over the same way Sony Michel did. And it's like there's a lot of things that make tackling a little bit more complicated of a craft. And when we look at those things, I just break it down simply, and it doesn't even cover as much as it should, which is reaches, wraps, and hits. Because and I just don't think that the tracking services do a good job of that, because they would talk about Saquon Barkley and someone hitting his thigh pad and he goes 70 yards and they're like 70 yards after contact. And I'm like, what the fuck does that mean? To me, that doesn't mean shit if Nick Chubb, as another example, basically has to like work through a head-on hit from a blitzing linebacker coming downhill at him as he takes the snap, and he spins off the hit. Doesn't spin away from it. He literally hits him, spins off, and then drags a defensive end and a lineman another 3 yards. Which one's a bigger display of power and tackle breaking? The guy who got fly swatted on a thigh pad, or all of that? And to me, that's why it can really be illusory, some of what goes on.
Well, it's kind of like drops too, where like if you're a wide receiver who's not even extending out for a ball because it's not like placed well, like that's not going to go down as a drop. You never got your hands on it. Whereas if you're a wide receiver who's laying out for like a poorly thrown pass and you get like 2 hands on it, but you can't bring it in. Oh, well, that was a drop. That was a bad play.
I think we know. I think I know who Roma Dunze is, which is
I'm very excited to hear this. I have no idea who Roma Dunze is.
I think he is a top 15 receiver, and I think that's what he's going to be. As Caleb gets better, he's going to be among the top 15. He is a wide receiver one who just happened to drop some tough passes.
Week 1 to 4 at Dunze is who he is, and then like week 5 to 10 at Dunze.
Yeah,
is the outlier.
Not as the outlier, because right now teams are doubling him, and they're doing a little bit more to shift towards him, and Caleb's having to go away from him a little more often. And some of the things that they asked him to do were a little bit harder, and wide receivers drop those types of plays. So if you're not getting as much love, and then you have to make the real tough plays when you haven't, and you don't, in order to keep that production up. It's early on, but I'm not too worried about this. This is kind of like Terrell Owens in his second year when he dropped a shit ton of passes, or early Brandon Marshall, or some other guys who just they have drops. I think he's going to be fine. Let's see, who is it? Let's pick 2 more teams and then we'll move on. But okay, I'll say Houston as one. I think we know who Woody Marks is, though a lot of people don't. Woody Marks is kind of like the Tajay Spears of this offense. He's a good player. On occasion, he's probably going to be able to give you running back 2 value as possibly like a committee back, but I don't think he's going to turn into like Austin Eckler. I don't think that's going to happen. I think he's good, but not that good. CJ Stroud.
Is he rookie Stroud or is he sophomore Stroud? Who is CJ Stroud?
He's in between. I hate to say it because it sounds like a safe answer, but he's in between that. Like he was never quite that great, but he was he was never as bad as sophomore version. His line needs to get better. He's in that tier with Bo Nix. That's where I think he can be. Maybe on the lower end of that tier, but I think that he's in that tier. Whereas Nix is probably a guy who you could see in that top 5 to 7 most years and occasionally above that with a great offense. I think Stroud is probably more in that top 7 to 12 when the offense is good. But it's never going to, and occasionally he'll veer into the top 5. Kind of like Dak Prescott in that sense, because
I love Prescott. I think Prescott, and part of it might just be sympathy, where like Prescott happens to go to a franchise that has absolutely no appreciation for him. Like historically, Dallas Cowboy fans are not known for appreciating what they have when they have it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I always feel like
they're the most spoiled. I think they're the most.
He's in that 5 to 7 range, and the Cowboy fans are mad that he's not like top 3.
Yeah, they're like that. They're the spoiled babies of the fan bases. I mean, I think they very are. There's a born on third mentality to be a Cowboys fan.
I was in Dallas for 10 years in the Dallas area, and I remember like I had conversations with people when Romo was there, and they said things like, Romo's good, not taking anything away from Romo, but we know what we have in him. Maybe we should try and see what we have in this Kyle Orton guy.
Yep. Yeah. It's nutty. It's nutty. I would say,
what about Nico?
Yeah. Nico. I think Nico's a tease. I think he's a guy that you want to take your shot on at being a top 12 player because of the year that he had. But I just don't think I don't think he can stay healthy enough over the long enough period of time to become the player people expect. So like he's a year-to-year player. You're just hoping and praying he stays healthy. And when he does, you're going to get top 15 to top 20 production, probably higher than that. Probably more like top 8 to 12. But I just don't believe it's going to stay.
Who's a better receiver, Nico Collins or Michael Pittman Jr.?
Ooh. I would say skill-wise, I would say Nico Collins. Okay. He runs a better array of routes, a wider array of them. But I would say availability-wise, if you count availability factor in it, you take Michael Pittman, even though he's more the mayonnaise version of the, of the sandwich there. He's more like a bologna sandwich as opposed to Nico Collins is probably something a little fancier. But that it's reliable and he, so I would.
For a second there, I thought you were going to say something really spicy and say you thought that Pittman was actually the better receiver.
No, I don't think. No, I don't think he is. He's a more limited guy. He's tough. He's physical enough, but they ask him to do what he can do well. But that's not primary receiver stuff. I would take T. Higgins over Michael Pittman right now.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, that's some of the guys. So what would you do? Just with that in mind, let's move on to like team ownership. If you owned a team, it doesn't have to be everything, but what would be one thing that you would do, in that capacity if you had the power?
We talk all the time about like culture is everything. And to me, that's where I would start is I would work on culture. Um, you know, I would NFL players are adults, right? They're people showing up for a job, and some owners get that. Some owners are going to say, "I'm going to treat you like an adult." You know, I'm going to like let you make adult decisions and abide by that. And some owners, I think, view them like they think they're playing fantasy football. Like when I have a guy on my team, that's a simulacra of the guy. You know, like I don't have Javonte Williams on my team. I have like numbers in a spreadsheet that represent Javonte Williams. You know, like I can cut him to send a message, or I can do whatever, and it doesn't matter. It's just ones and zeros. I would make sure that the players are treated as holistic people, and I would support like, hey, do you have any passions other than football? Like, how can we support that? You know, how can we like make sure that your family is well taken care of? How can we make like, are you having trouble finding schools? Like, what can we do to take care of you as a whole person rather than just these athletic feats on a football field once a week? And same thing with coaches. And I feel like as an owner, that's really my only job, is to nurture the people in the organization and to create a system where they can thrive and be the best versions of themselves. Like it's not my job to coach the team. It's not my job to acquire the players. It's not any of that. It's my job to hire people who are going to also continue that, and they're going to treat their players like professionals, and they're going to and I feel like there's like a million little examples. You know, when you're cutting down to your final 53-man roster, how is a coach handling the cuts? Like, I feel like some coaches are more sensitive about it, and some coaches are like, well, you're not on the team, so I don't care about you anymore. It doesn't matter. Can you treat players like adults? Are you like instituting curfews on road games and basically saying, I'm going to assume you're like an 18-year-old kid who can't be trusted to make good decisions? And I feel like the best organizations, consistently the most successful ones, are the ones that understand that it's not just about like, you have to care about the people outside of those 3.5 hours on Sunday. You have to care about them all the other days too.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, I think for me, I try to go to the root of that, and that would probably begin with me, obviously with the scouting aspect of it, that I'd want to get the type of players in the building who I feel like who are going to live up to being adults, you know, and who have already gotten a good handle on that before they got into the working world. Especially with my experiences of dealing with adults who didn't behave like adults in the working world. You want to try and weed those out where you can, because they can be problematic. So I think from a scouting perspective, before I even got to scouting, I would probably want to do as much research and lead work as possible about who do I need to hire who are going to interview these players, and how are we going to conduct interviews? What are we going to ask of these players to find out what we need to find out? And how are we going to do the law enforcement background, psychological job interview type of stuff? And who's going to administer it, and who's going to interpret it, and who's going to make decisions off of that? Because that's the biggest part of scouting that the media doesn't really understand, but is a huge part of, you know, why maybe Jahmyr Gibbs was their choice over DeAndre Swift in Detroit, and why they were excited about that, and why he was someone they felt like was worth a first-round pick and a cornerstone player for them. Or why Jimmy Smith of the Baltimore Ravens, when he got picked by the Ravens, the Chicago Bears had him off their board because he was a bad character, when the Ravens were actually able to ascertain that he smoked pot, but he basically did it as a pain management thing. And he was otherwise, they discerned that he was a good citizen who they didn't think was going to be a trouble for the organization at all. And they got themselves a pretty good player for a while, you know? So I would want to look into those things first to make sure I have the infrastructure in place, not only for hiring players, but also probably coaches, you know, because I want coaches and scouts and executives, and same with the executives too. I want them to work together to be able to work together in a way where they are consistently trying to improve the process of knowing what kind of players they're looking for, why they're looking for them, and and then what the scouts are going to need to know to be able to acquire them, so that we get better. So what that's going to all boil down to is that it would be a long-term process, and I would probably then make sure that I would find, from a PR standpoint, I would probably hire a PR person privately and just say, okay, I'm going to give you a challenge here, because basically what my design is I'm looking into the legal aspect of how can I circumvent the NFL's bylaws so that the team that I buy can be owned by the city by the time I leave. Like, can I leave the team to the city, to a group of trustees? Can I have it? Can I create a Packers-like plan and not have the owners go against me? Can I make it happen that way? And I'm going to give myself, something like 15 years, something like that, like a 15-year time limit. And I want to figure out the PR approach, the best way to basically tell the media and the fans, we're going to suck for about 5 to 7 years. And if we do any better than that, it might be luck, or we got ahead of schedule. But we're going to suck because we're building things that most NFL teams don't have. And part of that is a legitimate scouting system, a legitimate tool for teaching and developing coaches, players, and scouts. And we're gonna take some approaches like drafting a quarterback every year. We're gonna take some approaches with benching and development that other coaches don't do, where it's like we're gonna sit quarterbacks and then have intermittent starting. We're gonna do we're gonna look at ways how we can leverage our advantages in the draft, and we're gonna get a lot of shit wrong in the first few years, and you're gonna hate me specifically, and probably hate this team for a little while and be upset with it. But it's okay, because at the end of that 15-year period, your city's going to own the team. They can do whatever the fuck they want to do with it. But I'm thinking by the end of that 15 years, you're going to wish that I hadn't left, but you're going to have a lot of good things in place, that you're going to want to continue to roll with because it's working. So that's kind of where I would go.
Yeah, and I do think that, like, the owner is really the only person involved in a team that has a long-term stake. Players, their careers are so short. Coaches, occasionally a coach will last a long time, but most coaches are assuming, like, 4 years from now, who knows where I am, right? General managers, there's no long-term stakeholder who you're saying, like, 10 years from now is still going to be involved with this team with a high degree of confidence, except for the owner. And so I do think any sort of long-term planning, long-term stability, I think owners should make those plans more explicit. You see so many owners who, like, hire a coach and the coach struggles in the first year and they're very reactionary and they're pulling the plug. And sometimes it's the right decision. Jeremy Foley, athletic director at the University of Florida when they were winning across so many different sports. When he fired Ron Zook in the middle of the season, people asked, why fire him now? Why not let him play through the season, whatever? And he said, I just believe that anything that should be done, that must be done eventually, should be done immediately. Like, as soon as I reach the point where I'm like, Ron Zook's not in our long-term plans, I'm going to let him go and start looking for the next thing. I don't think, like, you say, hey, I'm going to give this coach a 5-year runway. I don't think that's like a death pact. If you at some point realize that he's not the guy, you should be able to move on. But I think you should spell it out in advance that, like, I'm going to give you 5 years. Like, these are the things that if I see them, maybe I'm going to reevaluate and shorten that. But it's not going to be like, oh, you won 27% of your games. To me, that's not one of the threshold things. But if you're saying things like, if the players are coming to me and saying that, like, you're acting like a tyrant and you're treating them like children, or, like if you're getting something like Josh McDaniels in Denver, where it's not that the team isn't winning, it's that he's completely destroying the culture, and he's acting like a little petty tyrant who got his first taste of power, something like that. But I would spell that out in advance. Like, I'm going to give you 5 years. I'm not really going to judge you based on performance over the first 2 years or whatever, X years, whatever you think is fair. You discuss it with the coach. I am going to judge you based on this. Like, I'm expecting a standard of professionalism from you, right? If you're in the media all the time because you're like getting drunk after games and running your mouth and talking about our players, like, that's absolutely something worth considering. I expect this degree of professionalism. My primary goal here is building culture. And if you're actively undermining that, we'll reevaluate. But for the most part, like, I'm going to give you 5 years. I'm going to put down, like, make very explicit and clear, like, what the expectations are and what the time frame is, and then I'm going to stick to it. And if the winds turn against me and everybody's calling for your head, pound sand. I've got my deal in place. We're still working the plan. Maybe the plan works, maybe the plan doesn't. But constantly, like, having a bad plan is not worse than having no plan at all. Yeah. Constantly throwing out your plan and getting a new one.
And I agree with that wholeheartedly. In fact, one of the things that I would point out about what you said is there is really, a lot of people think of what a coach should be like. And I think a lot of coaches conform to what they think they should be like because of that. And there's pressure that I know I only have 2 or 3 years and I'm dead if I don't get this off the ground that fast. I'd want to remove that because I don't think working people under pressure is necessary. It creates a lot of dysfunctional behaviors and you don't get the actual people you need. Now, the ones who shine the most don't care and those are great. I mean, I think Dan Campbell, cares, but I think he was like, I'm going to do this my way and I'm going to sell them on my way along with Brad Holmes. And we're going to convince them that we need, that of what we did. And they were able to sell, look, we've played hard. We're getting better. We may not get better, but I want.
And ownership said I remember an interview Campbell's first year when they were struggling and people were talking to ownership. Oh, are you reconsidering your decision? And they're like, no, we had a plan in place. Like this was not like the plan was the plan. We're not going to discard it just because the winds are blowing in another direction.
That's right.
We're going to see this through.
Yeah. I want to avoid reactionary thinking. I want people to actually have room to think and to be creative and to come up with things and know that we're going to fail. And that we're going to fail enough times until we do succeed, but it's going to be as a team, not as a me, and because eventually what I want is that I may be more involved in the early stages, the first 5 to 7 years, but then, from the uninformed fan base take, it would be, yeah, well, once Waldman got out of the picture, we started winning. But then the more informed picture would be, oh, they actually got processes set up. They figured out what their mistakes were. They started winning, and they got the right people in place and everything going on well, and it's running smoothly, that I don't need to tinker with anything. I don't need to be Jerry Jones with a coach's hat on trying to tell Barry Switzer how to run a play in training camp and have even my Patsy Barry Switzer go, that's not how we do things. You're going to have to please just, go away for a little bit, But I mean, that's how I would look at that is that I'd like to be able to have coaches, because you think about the NFL and when it started, you had Hallis, who was a coach. You had Al Davis, who was a coach. They became owners. They moved their way up into the organization in a lot of ways. They saw multiple things. It would be kind of cool to be able to have a coach who's like, I'd like to be a GM now. I would like to work in this area, and feel like that they have a handle on the system and how it wants to go, that there's maybe you can then bring up an assistant who's actually worked with them, and maybe be able to hire from within and be able to create that. The only problem with that issue sometimes too is that when you have cultures where everybody gets hired from within, they get a little incestual in a bad way. and you've got to
Is there a
guard
good way to
against
be
that.
incestuous?
No, there really isn't. But
Okay,
yeah.
in a bad way, kind of threw me there.
Yeah,
I'm like,
that's true. That's true, right? But like there's some organizations that seem to brag about it. I'll say
Yeah.
that. That's probably why I said it that way.
Yes.
Because I've seen some organizations that brag about it.
They view it as
and
a strength.
Yeah,
Right.
and you're like, no, that's not a strength, dude. You think it is, but it's not. But thank you for pointing that out. But yeah. So I mean, I do think that taking away the pressure, because there's already enough self-imposed pressure. You don't need an asshole coming down from the top of the organization chain to tell them shit that they already know.
That's what I was gonna say. Like, don't tell people shit they know. Like, they know.
Yeah.
You know, if a quarterback throws an interception and comes off the field, don't go up to him and be like, "Hey, that was a bad play." Duh, he knows that shit.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
If you don't have something useful to add, you're not contributing.
No,
anything. You're just
and so more important is to be able to say that you don't know and that you're going to find out. You know, and I'd rather have an organization where it's run along those lines, and because, you know, to me, if, you know, I'm just trying to, random reporter podcaster asks me something and I say I don't know, we're going to find out. And they go, they don't know what's going on. And I'd be like, next time they ask a question, I'll just say, probably say, why am I going to answer? I'd probably be hated in the media, but it's okay.
Right.
Like that's all right. That would be a fun job to be hated in that fashion, but beloved by the organization, knowing that the organization knows where we're heading and feels good about where this is going. Because at the end of the day, it'll be, freezing cold takes will be all over, those people. And I don't even really care at that point, if you're collecting rings, or you're at least, even if you went from a team that, like the Lions, if the Lions spend the next 10 years as like the Buffalo Bills of the 1990s, I mean, those are still glory days. You would like to see them win a ring, and I know that Bills fans would say, "Oh no, it's awful that we never won one." But at the end of the day,
I think Bills fans they would have said that in like 2000, and then they went like, what was it, like 18 straight years without a playoff win or something, and they're like, actually, no. In hindsight, those Super Bowl appearances are looking pretty nice now. Like,
exactly.
I wouldn't mind a little bit more failure of that sort than failure of this, where we're just not even in the.
If you're consistently contending and at the brink of it, to me, you don't want to settle for that. But if that's at the end of the day, my death sentence is that, well, they had 10 straight playoff appearances. 5 out of 7 games that they went to the conference championship. They won, they won 4 of those conference championships and went to the Super Bowl 4 times, and they lost. But they played competitive football in each of those games, and there were some coulda, woulda, shoulda moments, but they were still. I'd be happy with that job. I'd feel like that was a successful gig, especially if after 5 years after I leave, they're still playing winning football. 10 years after I leave, they're still playing winning football, and the organization is still figuring out, still on the cutting edge of being good, and running smoothly. So, yeah.
I think too, like a good owner, and this is true of a lot of things, like successful people. I feel like you exist to solve other people's problems. Other people don't exist to solve your problems, right? Like, you're not dictating to like, hey, I need you to do this, I need you to do this. You're saying like, look, if there's something you're struggling with, my door's open. You come in, you talk to me, and I'll do what I can to try to fix it. I'm not saying I can, but like, that's my job. I'm not here to do anything except what you guys need me to do. And that's, like I did acting way back in the day. And one of my acting teachers said, like, as an actor, your job in any scene is to make the other actors on stage look as good as possible. And if you do that and all the other actors on stage do their best to make you look as good as possible, everybody's going to look amazing. Right. But if you're like, a lot of actors are like out for themselves and they're like making choices that are going to like reflect well on them, but will make everybody else on stage look worse by comparison. And if everybody's making those choices, then the whole production goes to shit and nobody looks good. Whereas like the selfless actors who are busy trying to prop up the other people on stage with them, like that's when you get like these magical productions and where everybody looks amazing.
Yeah, I mean it's funny. It's like I was thinking about Brock Bowers running a route that I highlighted on X the other day, where he got open, but it was a 3-man route combination on one side. And the detail that he played with that route was the reason that he helped create the bind with those other 3 receivers. And what he did, if the defenders reacted to him in a certain way, his other 2 teammates would have gotten open because of what he did. He understood the route combination and how it impacted the defense. He just happened to be the one that got open, and because the defenders reacted differently, but it was part of the whole mix. So he saw the whole picture. And I mean, another point that I would probably do is I would start making relationships with maybe 3 or 4 teams in other leagues and reach out to them and be like, listen, we're going to have some players that we're probably going to be cutting. We think that they would probably be good to have some opportunities to play, in another league. And we're going to recommend that to them when we cut them and explain, here's the things that we think you need to work on. Here are the things that we think you need to get better at. And we're going to recommend you maybe sign with one of these 3 clubs, and develop that relationship as kind of a minor league type of thing. And then have some scouts who actually scout those specific leagues and see how they're improving, and have us maintain scouting reports on them and bring them into camp, each year if we think it warrants it, and then re-sign them if we need to. I mean, like I'd purposely draft 2 or 3 quarterbacks a year, and probably have that system, have that arrangement set up so that I could get those guys recommended to go down there and play, and these are the things you need to look for and work on, and have those relationships. And those relationships with those teams may change depending on whether those coaches change, whether what happens with the hiring and firings of those teams. But try to create my own minor league system so that I could say, that quarterback's playing well and we like what he's doing here. Okay, let's bring him into camp this summer and let him compete a little bit and see where he's at. And at least foster some sense of like development, some focus on that, bringing in quarterback coaches and having them be a part of the development plan, knowing that they aren't there to they aren't coaching game plan. They're literally coaching developmental factors and observing them, even if it means like that most of their developmental work is done behind the scenes with the backups, but that and if it's a young rookie, that maybe that most of that's going to be given to them at the end of the year because they've got too much going on, or there's certain things that might take more time than they have. But like, have some system in place like that, so that it's not just like, yeah, you're gone. It's more like, okay, we're going to have to waive you, but we have 3 teams that we've already spoken with that we feel like you'd be a good fit with them in this league. Obviously, you can go see if you can sign with somebody else, but we're going to tell you you're probably still going to be out on the street, or they're going to stash you on a practice squad, and they're probably not going to do a fucking thing with you, unless they need you into a game. Then they're just going to throw your ass in. And if you think you can handle that, good luck. But if you find yourself, even like after you go through that and tell us, yeah, fuck off, I'm going to go somewhere else and wind up on the Cardinals, and this is what happens and it doesn't work, and you contact us if you find that you want that opportunity, and contact us, and we'll try and arrange an opportunity through that other league. But we want you to keep that in mind so that if things start going well for you in another league and we offer you an opportunity, remember that who gave you that chance to work on your game, because we want to see you develop. We think you can. And just kind of make those types of relationships and see what could come of that with just every position. Yeah, because the more, that's the area that I don't think the league cares about, because they have this bottleneck of players, but if you can develop guys, maybe it only works out once or twice, but it worked out for Kurt Warner. Maybe it wasn't developmental the way I'm pointing it out, but if you can find a Kurt Warner once every 10 years, once every 15 years, but you can find also a Jacob Sailors, who's a nice kick returner for the Lions, or other guys, and you can have the edge on signing them because they're like, they were a good organization. Like, they have their act together. I've heard players who've bounced around who go, God, I was so glad to leave that team. That all they did was party. Even the coach partied with them. Or I was so glad to be a part of this team. Everybody on that team literally was like interested in trying to help out from every level. I would want to be more of the latter. So.
Well, yeah, when you said other leagues, at first I thought you meant like the NBA. I'm like, things didn't work out for you here, but like,
I think you could be a good point guard. Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
do a bit of cross training.
Yeah, exactly. LeBron, I know everyone said you could be a good tight end, but maybe you should stick to basketball. No.
Yeah,
no. Just like the UFL or any type of, or even the Canadian Football League. Though I would probably try and stay in the States just because of the rules in terms of the format. But even Canadian League, I would try and make some relationships like that and see what could come of it. Because at the end of the day, just getting a chance to play has value.
Right.
It's just that in the NFL, you kind of want to have a combination of things. So look, we've gone well over an hour. As Adam joked last week, I come up with the Hall of Fame stuff whenever I figure out what else we run out of things to talk about. Well, we didn't run out of things this week, so we'll put that on the back burner. But thanks again for listening. Obviously, you can find Adam's fantastic work at footballguys.com. You can find me there as well, and we'll see you next week.